This is the unfiltered truth about entrepreneurship. Raw, no BS, no sugarcoating. Welcome to Entrepreneur Intel. I'm your host, Wes Matthews. Each episode, we'll learn from experienced founders and uncover the top 5% learnings that led to their success in all things personal, family, and business. This show is sponsored by Stealth Consulting, delivering clear marketing strategies, ROI, and no surprises. I'm really excited to chat with today's guest. So he is a CEO in the intelligence and security industry. And a very unique thing about him is he's developed systems for impending crisis and preventative crisis. He's a reserve police officer, focuses on asset protection of human capital. Uh, he is the CEO and president of the North Group based in Milford, Michigan. Welcome, Steve Hernandez. Hey, Steve.
Nice to be with you, Wes.
Dude, thanks so much for coming on. I'm really excited to kind of dive in with you. You have such a unique skill set, business, so I'm really excited to dive in. But I first got to ask you, I asked everybody on the podcast, you've been an entrepreneur now for about 13, 14 years. You've been the CEO and president of the North Group for about 7.5 years. Like, what's one of the biggest lessons you've learned thus far in your journey?
Oh man, that's a loaded question right there. I would say the biggest lesson I've learned is this too shall pass.
That's a good one. I get together with a group of entrepreneurs, and every time we meet, we meet once a month. We talk about personal, family, business, and it seems like everybody kind of goes through things, and that's something we use where it's like it kind of hits everybody at different points, but it's definitely going to pass. But I'd love to just crack right in, right? Like, what is the North Group? You do so many different things and really cool things. Like, can you give kind of a high level of what the North Group is and does?
Yeah, so we're a global risk management firm. So our core focus is managing both crisis and preventative crisis measures, right? So whether it's protective services, protective intelligence, risk management, what we call embedded services, whether we're monitoring cameras and access control systems. Um, we're about 80 plus employees and we have, several hundred contractors globally. We've got offices throughout the US and we've got an office in Poland, and a footprint there as well. We're really focused on finding customers that have unique problem sets that we can help manage. And that could be anything from, a threat to their organization, a threat to their family, or a liability impending, or they just have some sort of compliance and audit regulation requirement where they need to have security procedures in place to prevent those liabilities from occurring and causing stakeholder damage.
So you mentioned, so that's quite a bit of employees. You have some in Poland. So for me, sitting here as an entrepreneur, I'm like, man, how does that apply to entrepreneurs or like a service like yours, right? Because I think it's some of the offerings that you have are so unique. Where I love leading entrepreneurs to services or individuals that they didn't know existed, right? Everybody's got problems, and like
Yeah.
so. Can you walk me through like what's a typical entrepreneurial problem that you're solving, or is it if there is, I hear a lot of, hey, this company's emailing me. I have to pay them $10,000 in Bitcoin or $100,000 in Bitcoin to get my data back. What should I do? Is that some of the stuff that you're dealing with on the entrepreneurial level?
Yeah, I get the ransomware. We call that ransomware, right? I get the ransomware or data theft conversation, but it could be around a threat to the organization, such as say someone's been terminated and they are now creating hate and discontent online, and they've made a threat that, "Yeah, I'm going to come back to that location and we're going to hurt so and so." So we have what's called a behavioral threat assessment model that we leverage for things like that, both for our celebrity clients, our private clients, and our corporate clients. We conduct a behavioral threat assessment once a human threat, and the way we do this is fairly interesting. So it's risk equals threats times vulnerabilities divided by countermeasures times impact. So everybody starts with risk, right? Always. But how do you understand what the risks are? So threats are going to be man-made in nature, right? Vulnerabilities are typically natural in nature, and then your impacts, from those two categories, get evaluated And then from there, you're looking at countermeasures that are currently in place, and that ultimately will form your analysis that allows you to advise the customer on risk as far as it goes for the organization or the stakeholders, right? We say stakeholders, I'll use a family office as example, or a private equity group, right? They may have an impending deal in a foreign country, and say that deal goes south, and they need to kind of get out of this. They need to understand what their risks are. Um, the way we evaluate liability is through four categories, and that's going to be legal liability, financial liability, life safety, and insurance. And then we look at it from how does a customer buy and spend on those liabilities. So there's a cost to each one of those liability categories. So ransomware would be a financial liability or a legal liability. It necessarily wouldn't be a life safety liability. It depends on if you're dealing with the intelligence community, maybe that information could lead to life safety concerns. Um, in some aspects, maybe national sports teams, other things like that, travel itineraries, that could lead to a safety concern with that data breach. But legal and financial issues is where we would put that. If you called me and said, "Hey, all of our data has been stolen, we don't know what to do," we always advise don't pay anything until you understand the situation. Um, but and there's insurance liabilities to that as well, right? If you didn't have an insurance policy, and now you want to go get one because it happened, it might be an impending issue. So what is the cost to that liability? Then we multiply that by 0.0134, and that typically puts us in a category of what the customer should spend. And there's a lot of preventative customers that come to us. There's a lot of reactionary customers that come to us as well, though.
That's interesting. So part of your intro is, you're supporting organizations, crisis management, problem solving. You got some such as veterans and human trafficking. Like, does that tie in at any capacity with, like, I'm looking at businesses, whether it's an entrepreneurial run company or a Fortune, 100 or 10 company. Like, I would imagine once you get to a certain revenue clip or a certain amount of status as either you're an entrepreneur, business professional, like, at what point do you have to start looking into your company where, hey man, like I never thought about this stuff, but I can't be delusional and I need to talk to your company to prevent, because I don't know what I don't know, right? Or an entrepreneur doesn't know what they don't know.
So, the counter human trafficking stuff we've done over the years and continue to be involved in is philanthropic in nature. The fight against probably, I think, one of the most evil things on the planet, which is people that are going to harm or hurt kids or exploit children. I think that fight is an ever growing battle. And I could talk for days on that. I mean, that's something that our organization is very interested in looking at from both of an intelligence and then kind of actionary standpoint of how do we help, how do we train, how do we assist advise. Behavioral threat assessment, for example, right? If an individual is suspected of doing something criminal or that breaches legal grounds, um, conducting a behavioral threat assessment to understand, is this being, what's their motive, what's their intent, right? So we take those same tactics from the commercial space into the philanthropic space to help prevent human trafficking or help mitigate the impact of trafficked areas and victims.
How prevalent is human trafficking? Like, as you're talking, my mind's kind of like, I don't hear anything about it. I'm not focused on it. But how, like, you and I are in the same area, right? Southeast Michigan. Like, how big of a problem is it?
Well, it's a very big problem. The problem with understanding it is you have to put it into buckets. So you have known to the victim perpetrators, right? And then you have groups, and then you have transnational groups. And then to further break that down, you have to look at it, what type of trafficking exists. Everybody hears labor trafficking. I've got a 67-page report on trafficking, but it's all sex trafficking and labor trafficking, primarily to, teen minors or adults. And one of the big ones that we don't talk a lot about is the child porn exploitation that goes on in the world. And a lot of that's the known perpetrator to the victim. So this could be a family member, this could be a loved one. Um, it's crazy. I just had a conversation with my 6-year-old last night. He's, up in arms because he wants to go to a friend's house, and we know most of the parents, vetted most of the parents. I am one of those parents. I've got 2 boys. God help me and a girl if I had a girl, right? Because I might be a little bit more paranoid, but nevertheless, I don't think exploitation knows bounds, when it comes to gender. I think that, perpetrators don't, there's it's opportunity meets placement and access, and then a perpetrator has deviant behavior that they then push onto a child. That can happen anywhere. That could be a football coach, that could be, uh, a gymnastics, doctor,
Yeah.
um, right? I mean, so we were, all affected in Southeast Michigan by the Larry Nassar situation, right? So you don't know. And when you look at that, you got a doctor of high stature, well respected in the community, right? It could be a police officer. It could be a judge. It could be, I mean, positions of trust are not excluded to deviant behavior that's never been exposed. And I think for me, from a behavioral threat assessment standpoint, it it's a lot worse than we see on the surface, to the known perpetrator to the victim, right? I think we don't uncover that. I think a lot of people don't expose it, to the level that it needs to be exposed. But the exploitation of children is by far one of the most heinous crimes we have, to deal with in this country. And here's the thing: in some countries internationally, it's normal, right? It was normal in the Middle East. It was, and I think for me, it's one of those things where enough people don't focus on it, and it's hard. I've got people in my family that don't want to hear about it. They don't want to talk about it. They don't want to address it, right? And I get that. It's not for everyone.
Yeah, and like, and you in your position, I'm just assuming you see like the worst of the worst, or you have so much just institutional knowledge. I have 5 kids, and we had, my boys are older. We had a little girl, and now I worry about that stuff. New iPhones and just the internet. It's just crazy what's going on. Like, any tips or anything for parents? Like, you bring up a valid point of people want to avoid it, act like it doesn't even exist. But are there things that you see? Like, is it just communication with your kids, or how do you stay ahead of that? Right. When you have a family and it's that prevalent going on.
So, I mean, coming from the world that I come from, I'm obviously overly paranoid. I live a little bit of a different life. My family lives a little bit of a different life when it comes to this. Um, we're not I don't let fear consume my day to day or how we live, but I'm always prepared for an impending crisis. And I feel like, but I've been doing this since I was 17, right? Like, from the time I was getting ready to join the military, preparing my mindset to be situationally aware. Situational awareness is key. Um, I I I've always worked on something with my kids, um, through different stages and ages as they grow. My 14-year-old, who's 6'1" and 180 pounds and looks like a linebacker, at 14. I mean, no one's taking him, right? And they're gonna have a hell of a fight if they
Yeah.
try. Um, I don't even I have trouble taking him these days, right? He's just getting big. But he's very well prepared. He's educated. And one of the things I do is I play eyes and ears. What do you see and what do you hear? And we could be at a restaurant, we could be in a diner. If you allow your child's mind to open up and understand what makes them uncomfortable, that's a natural, um, response to that person. I've taken it a step further. Who in here might be carrying a weapon? Who in here could be a threat? And I start, as my oldest son got older, I started working on that with him, right? And he's been blessed enough to be part of active shooter trainings, and I mean he's been the assailant in an active shooter training at a school because I didn't have someone to do that part when I was teaching a police agency how we're going to respond to the active shooter, right? So he kind of gets it. I'll say that my youngest, like my conversation last night was, there are bad people in the world, and you need to understand that we're not trying to limit your ability to go be with your friends. We're just not doing overnights at such a high rate. Um, because I think it just I'm just uncomfortable with it as a parent, right?
Yeah.
Um, I also talk to my kids, about, has anybody ever tried to touch you? I mean, and that's might be an uncomfortable conversation for some people, but I'm going to ask the question, right? And I'm going to understand if somebody's ever tried to expose my kid to something or exploit my kid in any way. Um, because I think if you have that open dialogue, right, the moment something does happen, this is wrong, right? This is not how we live, and I need to go tell mom and dad. And I'll say I've talked to many parents that have now at that phase been told something. What do I do next? And that's, I think, the more important conversation is if you are told something, what do you do? One is you preserve evidence. Um, I won't get too far into that, but if your son or daughter were to come home and say they were sexually assaulted, right, it's immediately to the hospital, preserve evidence. And I'm coming at this from a law enforcement standpoint now, right? Because investigatively, people need to be prosecuted. The next thing is, preserve information, um, and, and then instill into the victim that everything's going to be okay. This was wrong. And we're going to get you the support that you need. There's too many victims that don't come forward out of fear, both children and adults, right? I mean, we're talking, date rape, we're talking all those kind of things
Yeah.
that probably go on at a scale that we can't even quantify.
Now, when's a good time to bring like you in your company, right? Because if something like that happened to a parent or even a business owner, like take that situation and, it could be very various different things. Some people
I
say,
mean,
well, contact the police right away. Then you have people who are like, don't contact the police or contact a lawyer. Is your company or are you the guy to go to first to kind of help navigate a situation like that?
well, no, I mean, we're a security company at the end of the day. I mean, I get a lot of people that will come to me. I've had dear friends that have come to me, "Hey man, my daughter thinks she might have been drugged and raped at a party last night. What do I do?" I mean, first things first, right? Where's she at? She's safe, right? Um, and then from there, it's, you know, the laws on consensual relationships are one thing here in the state of Michigan. I think for me, the common thing I'm seeing is the exploitation of digital media. Um, young teenager sends a picture to someone, and now that picture is out. My greatest advice I give everyone is tell your kids to put their damn phones down because they're once you push it out on here,
You're done.
we can find it. I mean, anybody can find it if they know what they're doing. So the cell phone is the greatest threat, to that topic, right? Because kids are on TikTok. TikTok's the worst thing to hit humanity, in my opinion. I don't have it on my phone, but that's because of what I do and the exploitation that I know the app performs, um, towards the user, and the data that the user has on their device to include banking and all kinds of other stuff.
Wow.
Um, so, being mindful and just talking to your children and your teenagers about, opportunistic threats towards, someone having placement and access to them and being able to exploit. And that deviant behavior sometimes manifests late in a perpetrator's life. Sometimes, they decide, they like kids. And as heinous as that is, right? They don't tell anybody, nobody knows, but they're a youth football coach. We got a problem.
Yeah.
So,
So on the security side of what you do, like I'm sure there's a big wide range of what you guys do in service, but I mean, you're going all the way to like big CEOs, big companies. Are you guys going in there protecting them personally, but then also like security protecting the company? Like what's some of like the big things you do in that arena?
yeah, so we have celebrity clients, we have commercial clients, we have a large government style events like, big political events that are upcoming, and we've done, past very, very large events, where we have, 50, 60 of the Fortune, 50 CEOs coming in, and we're helping navigate, and then also public-private partnerships, right? So we work closely with different federal, local, state agencies to manage security projects and venues and different things. Are the way we call it executive protection, right? So if you're a high net worth individual or a corporate executive, some corporations actually mandate through their stakeholder liability policies that they have security on them when they travel. Some can't travel without it. Some can't fly. And this is a crazy thing I learned years ago. Some executives cannot fly commercial. It's written into their employment contract. Um, so there's a lot around the corporate side. It's called duty of care, right? Organizations have a level of care to provide to their people. If they send someone to Africa, right? Doctors Without Borders send somebody to Africa. Doctors Without Borders has to have security on those doctors. If Apple or Amazon are putting a distribution manufacturing facility together in Mexico, they need to have security on their personnel that they're sending. That's the duty of care and liability, and that's a legal thing that they have to abide by. Um, if they know that there's a risk, especially they have a level of care to provide to their people.
So you're personally protecting them, but then there's also like these things, right? So I would assume that, this CEO that needs to be protected, there's like data protection or scam protection or AI. We talk about that and how that plays into all this. There's
Yeah.
different.
So yeah. Well, so first and foremost, if you're traveling overseas, I carry what's called a Faraday bag, which is an RFID and signal blocking bag. You can get them on Amazon for 24 bucks. Um, I've got them all over our office. I just throw them in there. If I'm traveling internationally, I'll typically bring a burner phone too. I've got a whole bag of them in my closet over here, right? Just iPhones and flip phones and, phones that once I come back, I don't ever hook them up to my Wi-Fi. I don't ever, because it doesn't matter if you turn this off, the right organizations can still listen and track.
That's what I was going to ask you.
Uh,
Like you with your knowledge, like yeah, you turn this off, or like how
that doesn't do
protected
anything.
are you, right?
Listen, if you can't take the battery out, then you can't turn it off.
Interesting.
So that is the rule. And here's the thing, when we look at where people travel and what they do, it's if a company ABC comes to us and says, "Hey, we're launching an office in you know the difference between China and Colombia, right?" I'm not so much worried about the Colombian government targeting my client. I'm more worried about transnational crime. With China, I'm very worried about the government targeting our client. So we call that, counter espionage, corporate espionage, right? Whatever, because the Chinese government is its own. Their intelligence services. They also own their own corporations in China, right? So competitive market analysis is now corporate espionage, right? So what we consider competitive market analysis company, B2B, either exploiting information to understand market strategies and market differentiators and how you do your business and all that, product secrets, trade secrets. In China, when you go to China, the government is collecting that information. A governmental intelligence agency, right? Associated with the CPP, right, or the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, right, is the one collecting that information. Versus here in the United States, you have companies that hire folks like us to collect information, or they have data aggregators, right? So that's kind of how that works.
So you mentioned while we were chatting, like, have you created your own systems, or like, how do you manage through all this data? Like, when you're taking on a client or working through a project, like, how do you get, you call that intelligence, or like, what systems, or how do you approach that?
Well, intelligence is really, i- you know information that we collect, we process it, we analyze it, we understand it, and that's the product of intelligence, right? So information starts, at the receiving end, right, and then goes into an analytical cycle. We figure out what pieces of that data are relevant to the customer's safety, security, um, a myriad of different things, and then from there, we once we process it, we understand it, then that becomes intelligence in a reporting function that we would then give to the customer or to the powers that be, the security team, the executive protection team. What we also have what's called threat intelligence. So if you decide you want to go on a safari and you're going to Africa tomorrow and you call me and you say, "Hey, I just need to know, I'm going with my family, we're going on a safari." So we have a travel risk management program that we do for many families and organizations around the globe. Doesn't matter where you go. We have a lot of data and tools, technical tools, analytical tools that we pull. We pull a lot of open source, what we call OSINT data as well. And then the other side of our business is human, right? Human intelligence, where we have contacts on the ground that we'll go to and we'll say, "Hey, got a client coming here. What do you think? What are you hearing? What's going on?" We put our money where our mouth was years ago. We went to the places where we knew we were going to have customers going. So we had relationships to receive them or at least give us the information upon them entering that area. Um, and for us, that travel threat risk management side of the house is very big. We also track those customers when they move, right? So I have systems that allow us, it'll populate threat data. There's been an active shooter 10 blocks away.
Oh, wow.
We're going to advise the client to shelter in place till we figure out what's going on. Get with our law enforcement partners, advise that we have, a diplomatic client or, we have a what we call a VVIP, right? Somebody that we need to protect. So it just depends on the nature. Every one of those clients is set up in a very boutique and custom manner. If that makes sense.
No, it makes a lot of sense, and it's really awesome because I didn't know something like that existed, right? Like, I have 5 kids, a wife. I'm getting them passports. Like, we wanna travel to Mexico, right? But me as an average civilian, I hear, "Go." I hear people like, "Don't go, go," and I'm like, "Man, I wanna go take my family to have a good time, but I don't wanna be worried about something happening." So, you would take a call from a guy like me, help my family, like, do is that like a retainer thing that you do, or is it just
Yeah, so we have fixed costs for our travel risk assessments, right? And then you say, "Hey, I don't necessarily need security when I'm there, but I'd like a secure driver from the airport." We have contractors and vendors all over the world. We would call a vendor or have one of our contractors go. I have clients that have their own aircraft, right? So sometimes, it's just, "Hey, we're gonna throw somebody out the plane with you." They're gonna be part of the furniture though, right?
yeah,
That's kind of our inside thing, right? You're the furniture or, "Hey man, you're hip pocket, right? You're on them." Um, I, done hundreds of those details, domestically and around the globe, right? Where, personally back in the day where I was with the client, hip pocket, if something happens, I'm grabbing the back of their belt, cover and move, put them in the car and go. Um, at the end of the day, like, I've had that environment a couple times where I've had to move some clients out of harm's way. We've done a lot of evacuation work. We evacuated folks out of Israel, Ukraine.
well,
So, for us, we love pre-crisis, right? We prefer to be pre-crisis. Post-crisis is always very expensive for everyone, to include the client. So I've had clients that come to us and say, "We're doing this. We think we'll be good." And we're like, "Well, we don't really, and they're like, "No, we'll take the chance. Call you if something goes wrong." And then 11:30 at night, all I hear is, either gunfire in the background
wow,
or whatever. And they're like, "We need out."
wow,
And, I had this with a faith-based organization and they, went down somewhere where some conflict started. I'm like, "You probably shouldn't." They did anyways, and now they needed to get out. And, it was, you know, so
wow. So you've had the North Group for 7.5 years. You've built a really significant organization. Like, what led you to start the company? Like, you said military background, but like, what sparked the passion to go down this path?
well, it's kind of a funny story, right? So I was in the military, did the whole global war on terrorism thing, was in Iraq 2007, 2008. Didn't really understand that, I mean, we were losing 100 to 125 guys during the height of the war, during the surge in that time, and it a day. And it was like kind of one of those things where for us, I didn't really have a plan. Like my plan was to stay in the military, do 20 and out, right? Crazy thing, I look at that now, I'd be like on my way to retiring here soon. Like, so it's wild, but the good Lord had other plans. Ended up getting out and I was gonna go to culinary school actually. Um, the joke was I heard that chicks like dudes that could cook. So I'm gonna go to culinary school. I'm a country boy from Highland, Michigan. I didn't really know much. Been around the world a little bit at this point, and I was a single dad. Um, and I needed to figure something out. Um, Buddy of mine called me, said, "Hey man, I need help with a problem set." Um, Made more money than I'd ever made for like 3 days worth of work uh, with a crisis, and literally, I haven't left the security industry since. But seeing the crises around the world that I had seen and started to get more acclimated to, I just saw a void for more risk management versus I got a guy, I didn't want to just be me doing the consulting thing. Entrepreneurship sucks. It's not for the faint of hearted. A couple quotes I live by: as heavy as the crown of thorns the king may wear, right? I mean, at
Yep.
the end of the day, like it's a lonely island, man.
Yep.
I feel like I've lost more friends trying to run and grow and lead a business because there's an expectation that they don't need to be held accountable. Family, right? I've hired family. Hey, I'll help you out, and then when the performance goes, it's like, hey, there's got to be this conversation. Um, I've had people. I had an employee that was a family member and my executive team would call, Ned and the cat with 9 lives
Yep.
because but it was like, I'm trying to help. And then a lot of the biggest lesson I've learned is you can't have a company full of donkeys when you're trying to raise thoroughbreds.
Yep.
You'll never see a pasture full of donkeys and one thoroughbred. The donkeys will kick the crap out of the thoroughbred. You will see one donkey in a pasture full of thoroughbreds, though, thriving and protecting, the herd,
Yep.
right? So at the end of the day, and that's one of my favorite, good old cowboy references right there. I got horses and I that's kind of my R&R, right? It's getting out there on a horse and getting out on the property and whatever. But when you look at this, for me, the journey started with enormous failure in my first company. Um, and mind you, I'm going through all kinds of personal stuff, being a single dad. I'm also trying to reacclimate back from a world that I expected to spend the rest of my adult life in, and that was ripped out underneath me. Um, because they said, "Hey, man, your knees, your back are gone. You're not going to be able to do this. We're gonna medically retire you." And I fought it for a while, and it was it was hard because the one caveat I'll say here is I had so many people, mentors that invested in me along the way, but it wasn't till about 2014 when I got serious about business. When this is after a failure, right? A failed
Mhm.
company, right? Hitting rock bottom. Um, and then, but I've never quit. My wife will tell you this about me is I've never given up, right? But I've had a lot of people take advantage of that tenacity. Um, and people will say, "Well, stop chances." Well, I'm not, I'm not going to change who I've been called to that bridge. And then, and I'll throw an extra grenade on it for us both, right? But I don't enter a relationship with trust but verify, and like if you're a good dude and you come from a brother of mine, I don't need anything else, right? That's it. And people are like, well, that's not a good way to run the bit. Well, it has been the very thing that's also almost killed me in business, but also built my business.
Yeah.
And honestly, this is not my company. It's the people that work here's company, right? I get, 60, 80 plus families here that rely on the success of this. I think that's the other hard part is peeling and appeasing to everyone's desires and needs. Um, I'll say that it's hard to quantify the journey, right? Um, but you know, failed more than I've succeeded, um, until the last few years, right? And then it wasn't really a metric to benchmark or compare anymore. It was just like, I'm gonna wake up every day. My mindset became this, Wes. My mindset was, I'm gonna continue to be me, and I'm gonna wake up every day and try to change the world and the worlds of the people around me. All I can do is do that, right? That's it. And I'm not gonna sit here and go, of course I've got a number, I've got goals, I've got aspirations, but I don't really care. And that was the
That's
change in
awesome.
entrepreneurship for me. I don't really care anymore. I'm gonna wake up every day and people will be like, "How I remember when you were this kid getting expelled from school and you were a troublemaker,
Yep.
and it's like I was just uninterested. I was uninterested as a kid, right? Like the math class didn't interest me, right? And I think my military service into early failures and entrepreneur led me to where I am today. And the basis of how I got here is going to be I I just woke up every day and I kept going. And in my head, this too shall pass.
Yeah. Well, no, I really appreciate that share. I mean, you just covered a lot of things, and I think you mentioned a couple things. One, like, yeah, it's super lonely being an entrepreneur, right? And there's a lot of stressors, a lot of things that weigh on you, but clearly the passion is what drives, and then not chasing the dollar, doing what you love, um, is huge. And the question I want to ask you, because like your business to me as an outsider looking in, man, details matter. I mean, details for you, from my perspective, life or death. If I screw a client up or one of my employees or teammates screw something up, like we can typically overcome it, right? But that's always a challenge in running a business, is always getting better, learning from your mistakes. But how do you architect systems and processes for your 80 team members? Because man, those details are critical, like beyond critical.
So the industry has some very common practices, do's and don'ts. This is an ever refining thing within our business. We are constantly looking at one is our customer relationships are built on trust. First and foremost, right? We do what we say we're going to do always. If we can't, we tell the customer. The processes around data and security methodologies, um, behavioral threat assessments, right? It's really about creating communication channels for the lowest man to not be on an island, right? The lowest woman, the lowest employee, right? They're not on an island. They understand where we're going as a company, what our mission is, and what our vision is. And for me, you know, I could go get a job as security director, chief security officer, advisor for a family, right? I could go do a million things. I'm not just doing this for me. I made peace a long time ago with you know, and what ended up happening was the journey to get into where we are and grow our revenue the way we have. Like I never expected us to get where we are. And now my focus is M&A, right? My focus is, growth through acquisition. And that's where, because I see the writing on the wall, our industry is going to evolve and change, right? Security is going to become way more technical, even on the protective standpoint. Um, which is why we pushed a subscription model to protective intelligence, right? Because I knew that we needed to be there and not heavy on human capital, but more on technology integration and how we're gonna ebb and flow with what our industry is saying it's gonna do.
And what does that look like for a business, right? Like, my sphere of influence are all entrepreneurs, and I'm a big proponent of you don't know what you don't know. And I see like big changes coming on the technology front. I mean, AI, I mean, the other day, other month, my son plays hockey. One of the parents was talking that they got a phone call from what they thought was their daughter. And she's like, Mom, I need help. They've got me. Somebody grabs the phone, like, I have your daughter. Like the voice, they're like, it was exactly my daughter's voice. And they went down, like they were ready to wire money over and do all these things. I mean, there's stuff like that, but then there's just pure business. Like, what's something that should I be thinking about as a business to your
The
point of like,
market,
I'm sorry?
yeah, the economy.
Yeah.
I mean, we're bearing down on probably one of the worst economic crashes that's impending. I think as a business, right, cash is king. Sit on as much cash as you can. I think the other thing you want to do right now is look at the I mean, what's your market saying? I mean, for me, right, security is if you're good at what you do, people will keep coming to you. I'm not I'm not at all worried about the security industry lagging. I would be worried about, dealerships, auto manufacturing. I mean, COVID created this environment where I think we realized that nothing is foolproof. Um, COVID also was exacerbated to the point of look how many businesses in the hospitality space went out, right? And it was because the capital on hand was 2 weeks. Um, you know, I would also, venture to say that the current threat landscape with the geopolitical environment, is concerning. If you're in manufacturing and, the proverbial, crap hits the fan, um, we think COVID's bad. We think 6 months of supply chain disruption's bad. Wait, wait till there's an international conflict, that, the least of everybody's worries is gonna be where we're getting toilet paper or where we're getting, car parts. I mean, if China decides to take Taiwan, the majority of our chipset and semiconductor, microprocessing is done in Taiwan. What? Right? I mean, how many businesses are affected by that? So and just to kind of tell your listeners, the way I look at risk is second and third order effects. So I don't ever look at risk in a singular manner. I don't ever look at, okay, well, someone's going to punch me in the face. The risk is I get hit in the face. The second order effect is that I fall down. The third order effect is that I hit my head on the ground. Right? This is a very basic example, right? So take that to a business level. You have an impact in your supply chain. You've now impacted your monetary standing and revenue and EBITDA, and now you're laying off half your workforce. And say a fourth order effect is okay, the issue gets cleared up, and now you have to go find a whole new workforce. You see what I'm saying? Like
Yeah.
the way I look at business risk is also been and I've got when I say I mean our team.
Yeah.
The way our team looks at business risk um, has been the inherent reason why we've been very successful in our space and what we do is because we're not just looking, we're looking, and this is the analogy I use, we're looking through the windshield, not living in the rearview mirror here.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, that's really good. That's really good advice and just feedback. I actually I think a lot of people feel better knowing you. I feel better knowing you. So if I go through a crisis, I know who I'm calling. You were actually introduced to me through Skip. So Skip's an amazing guy. He lives on my street, so I know where to go. However, if the listeners have a crisis or they have something that they haven't known where to take that, what's the easiest way to get in contact with you or the North Group if there's any questions or concerns out there?
Yeah, shoot us an email, right? Call us. Our website's, www.tngdefense.com, info@tngdefense.com. We'd love to hear from you. We also have a podcast, Time to Head North, right? So we're, we're all things security and risk management. Our core function as an organization is to help people solve complex problems and help minimize risk and liability to stakeholders.
Well, Steve, I can't thank you enough. Again, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I really appreciate it.
And thank you, Wes. I really appreciate you.
Thanks, Steve. Have a good one. This has been another episode of Entrepreneur Intel. Thank you for joining us. For show notes or other episodes, please visit us at entrepreneurintel.com. Until next time.